The cruise terminal in St. Louis buzzed with the usual energy of a summer morning. Families dragged rolling suitcases, their children darting ahead toward the massive riverboat that glistened beneath the rising sun. Couples held hands, snapping selfies against the Mississippi backdrop. Retirees clustered near shaded benches, chatting about bucket lists and long-awaited vacations. The air smelled faintly of diesel and fried food drifting from a nearby vendor cart. And then there was her. She moved through the crowd with the same slow rhythm as everyone else, a small camera bag slung over her shoulder, a sun hat shading her eyes. Her outfit was nothing remarkable: casual jeans, comfortable sneakers, a plain linen blouse. She could have been anyone from anywhere. She even smiled politely when jostled, murmuring apologies in a neutral accent that gave no clue to her origin. To anyone watching, she was only another tourist among hundreds preparing for a leisurely river cruise. But if someone had looked closer, really looked, they might have noticed the difference. Her steps were unhurried, yet deliberate. Her gaze, hidden beneath the brim of her hat, lingered on corners others ignored. A fire extinguisher near a stairwell, the locked hatch on the far deck, the rhythm of crew members moving luggage below. She seemed to take everything in, committing the environment to memory with subtle precision. When she handed over her boarding pass, her smile widened. Just enough, but her eyes did not change. They remained steady, unreadable, a surface too smooth to reflect what lay beneath. On board, passengers scattered into their chosen spaces, families rushing toward the upper deck for the best views, honeymooners claiming private spots along the railing, and retirees lining up at the buffet. Laughter and chatter quickly filled the air, mingling with the faint strains of jazz music piped through the ship's speakers. She found a quiet corner near the mid-deck railing. Her camera dangled idly from her hands, though she had yet to take a single photo. She wasn't here to capture sunsets or architecture. She watched people instead. A boy, no more than 10, leaned too far over the railing until his mother yanked him back. A teenage couple whispered, their fingers brushing as though the world might end if they didn't touch. A crewman moved quickly down a restricted passage, and her head tilted almost imperceptibly as she tracked his path. Every detail mattered. One woman from Ohio struck up a conversation with her. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" "Yes," she replied softly, her accent still hard to place. "Where are you from?" The woman pressed. "Just visiting," she said, her lips curling into a faint smile that revealed nothing. The woman laughed, mistaking her vagueness for shyness, and soon wandered off to rejoin her family. That was how it usually went. People rarely remembered her beyond a polite exchange. She was skilled at fading into the background, careful not to leave impressions too sharp to trace later. The passengers around her were buzzing with excitement about the journey, an iconic river cruise. 221 tickets sold, all bound for a 5-day exploration of America's heartland. For them, it was leisure. For her, it was observation. The ship's horn bellowed, drawing cheers from the crowd. Slowly, the vessel pushed away from the dock, cutting across the water as sunlight shimmered across the waves. The passengers rushed to the railings and upper decks, pointing out landmarks and waving at people on shore. She stood among them, smiling faintly, though her mind worked elsewhere. She traced the ship's layout with her eyes. 3 main decks, visible emergency stations, lifeboats hanging in neat rows. Her gaze flicked toward security cameras, mounted above the dining area, and noted blind spots between angles. She registered the positions of fire doors, staircases, and even the uneven surface of the deck that could make someone stumble in a rush. She memorized everything, not like a tourist, but like someone who might need the knowledge quickly. When she finally lifted her camera, it was more for camouflage than pleasure. She snapped a picture of the skyline, though her lens tilted slightly, capturing not the view, but the faint reflection of two crewmen exchanging a quick, silent nod. She lowered the camera, pressing her lips together. Her instincts stirred. The passengers carried on, blissfully unaware. A group of college students argued about which city stop would have the best nightlife. An elderly man entertained children by pretending his walking cane was a pirate's sword. The air was filled with joy, laughter, and music, the soundscape of safety. But she knew better than to trust appearances. Safety was fragile. It shattered quickly. The day unfolded like any cruise should. Meals served with smiles, drinks delivered on trays, staff assisting guests with kindness that seemed genuine. Yet, she noticed the small things. One crew member avoided eye contact, carrying himself differently from the rest. Another kept adjusting a poorly fitted uniform badge, as though it didn't belong to him. She made no scene. She didn't speak of it. She simply watched. By late afternoon, the tourists had settled into routines. Some lounged in deck chairs with novels. Others played card games in shaded corners. A band played soft blues near the lounge. She sat quietly near the railing, the river breeze brushing her face. From time to time, her gaze swept the deck, counting. 100 here, 50 there. Families scattered in groups. 221 lives altogether. She knew the number because she had counted twice already. It wasn't something tourists did. It was something she did. As the sun dipped lower, painting the water gold, she slipped briefly into the dining hall. Waiters bustled between tables. The clink of silverware punctuated bursts of conversation. A child squealed with laughter as his father made balloon animals from napkins. It was all perfectly ordinary, too ordinary, she thought. Her gaze shifted. To the far corner, where two men exchanged quick whispers before slipping into a staff-only passage. The other guests noticed nothing. She did. She returned to her seat on deck, silent. Her hands rested calmly in her lap, but her mind turned. With sharp focus. She was here as a tourist, or so everyone believed. But the truth was, she never traveled without purpose. And though the passengers saw nothing unusual, she felt that the air carried a current, an almost imperceptible tension, like the silence. Before thunder, her eyes lingered on the horizon as the ship pressed forward. The night would come soon enough. And with it, she suspected, the reason she was really here. For now, she remained in the shadows, unseen and unsuspected. But she would not remain just another tourist for long. The Mississippi spread wide beneath the riverboat, shimmering under the steady afternoon sun. The vessel cut through the water smoothly, leaving behind a frothy wake that glittered like broken glass. Laughter rose from the upper deck as tourists leaned over railings, waving to passing fishing boats and barges. The atmosphere was light, carefree, painted with the hues of a perfect summer voyage. She stood quietly near the mid-deck railing, half hidden behind a group of college students snapping selfies. From the outside, she looked content enough. Her camera still dangling loosely, her face relaxed, her eyes shaded by a brimmed hat. To anyone else, she blended perfectly into the crowd. But inside, she wasn't blending. She was dissecting. Every movement of the crew, every sound in the mechanical rhythm of the ship, every unfamiliar shadow stretched into her awareness. She had trained herself to absorb detail as naturally as others breathed. It was instinct, reflex, an almost involuntary act. Lunch service had ended only moments earlier, and most passengers lingered with the lazy ease of full stomachs. The lounge smelled faintly of fried catfish and spiced hush puppies, dishes that tourists eagerly photographed before eating. A brass band played mellow tunes near the bar, their notes drifting lazily through the decks. It was, by all appearances, leisure at its finest. She joined a family of strangers at a table for a brief spell, politely responding to their chatter about the next sightseeing stop. The father asked where she was from. "Just visiting," she said, her tone warm yet closed. The mother pressed no further, distracted by her son who spilled lemonade across the table. The conversation ended naturally, forgotten within minutes. That was how it always went, her answers so carefully neutral. They faded into nothingness. When she excused herself and stepped back onto the outer deck, the breeze shifted, carrying a faint trace of something unusual. Diesel exhaust, yes. That was normal, but underneath it, she caught a whiff of chemical tang, sharp and unfamiliar. Her expression didn't change. She inhaled once deeply, committing the scent to memory. Her eyes swept the lower deck. 2 crewmen hauled crates toward the restricted cargo hold, their movements hurried and unsynchronized. She noticed the smallest things. The way one's badge number was faded differently than the others. The way their boots didn't match the uniform standard. The faint hesitation when a passenger passed too close. Something was off. A tour guide's voice crackled over the loudspeaker, announcing a historic landmark along the shore. Passengers swarmed to the railing, cameras flashing. She joined them, leaning over just enough to appear enthralled, though her focus remained elsewhere. She watched the reflection of the crewmen in the glass window nearby, noting their nervous glances. One man slipped into a staff-only stairwell, locking the door quickly behind him. Another blocked the view by repositioning a cart across the entrance. No one else noticed. The crowd around her gushed about the view, arguing over whether the landmark was worth a picture. She kept her silence. Time passed in gentle waves of calm. Children played tag between rows of deck chairs. Retirees swapped stories about places they had traveled. Waiters moved efficiently through the crowd with trays of iced drinks, their cheerful smiles masking exhaustion. To the passengers, this was nothing more than a vacation, a memory in the making. To her, it was a shifting puzzle. She took note of the ship's rhythm, the timing of staff rotations, the moments when hallways went unobserved, the gaps in security that most would consider trivial. But to her, those gaps screamed vulnerability. At one point, she saw a waiter stumble near the lounge entrance. His tray clattered, glasses shattering across the deck. Everyone laughed, even applauded when he bowed theatrically. But she noticed. His hands trembling not from embarrassment, but from tension. His eyes flicked toward the restricted stairwell before darting away again. She filed it away in her mind. Another piece. As the afternoon waned, the river stretched darker under the shifting sky. Clouds began gathering far upstream, dimming the sun's glow. A storm threatened on the horizon, distant but inevitable. The mood aboard remained buoyant, passengers blissfully unaware of anything but their own enjoyment. She sat alone on a bench, sipping bottled water. To the casual observer, she looked like any solitary traveler. But her eyes traced the upper decks. She counted lifeboats. 12 in total, though one bore a slight crack along its hull. She memorized escape routes from each side of the vessel, quietly running scenarios in her head. Fire, flooding, attack. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. Her instincts rarely failed her. They had saved her life more times than she cared to recall. And now, on this riverboat filled with 221 strangers, those instincts whispered louder with each passing hour. The signals were subtle. Too subtle for the passengers, distracted by sunsets and cocktails. But she couldn't ignore them. The ill-fitting uniforms, the mismatched badges, the whispers exchanged in corners, the way certain crewmen lingered near emergency equipment as though staking silent claims. She knew the pattern. She had seen it before, in other countries, under other skies. The mask of normalcy always cracked the same way small flaws in the scenery, easy to overlook, until it was too late. And here, aboard this ship, the cracks were already widening. Evening arrived, painting the river in deep orange hues. Passengers gathered near the dining hall, eager for the grand buffet promised on the first night. Music grew louder, glasses clinked, and the mood swelled with festivity. She lingered at the edge of the crowd, her smile faint, but her thoughts far from the merriment. She didn't trust the celebration. Loudness created cover. Crowds masked movement. Danger could slip in unseen while everyone else was distracted. And though no one else realized it, she felt the tension thickening. The ship was too quiet in its unseen places, too chaotic in its visible ones. She leaned back against the railing, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The storm was closer now, its clouds heavy and bruised, lightning flickering in their depths. Thunder rolled faintly, almost drowned by the music and laughter around her. It struck her as fitting the perfect metaphor. The storm everyone ignored until it arrived overhead, and she was the only one watching. She adjusted her bag strap, her fingers brushing the edge of something hidden inside. Not a weapon, not exactly, but something just as valuable. A tool she might need. A piece of her real identity, concealed beneath the mask of a harmless traveler. For now, she stayed in character. The quiet tourist, the polite stranger. But deep down, she knew leisure never lasted. The storm wasn't the only thing on its way. The dining hall still carried the scent of roasted chicken and buttered rolls. Passengers lingered at tables, laughing, sipping wine, and picking at desserts they didn't really need. The brass band played a slow tune that seemed almost too cheerful for the heavy air pressing against her senses. She sat near the far window, her plate nearly untouched. Fork in hand, she pretended to nibble, but her attention stretched elsewhere. Her ears filtered the room's noise, not for melody or conversation, but for the threads that didn't fit. That was when she caught it, two men whispering near the service corridor, their voices barely audible beneath the swell of chatter. The words themselves didn't matter. She couldn't hear them clearly. What mattered were the patterns. Heads bent too close, eyes darting too quickly, sentences clipped like code. Her pulse slowed, not quickened, as she watched. Calm was her armor. Calm was her training. Around her, no one else noticed. A man from Kentucky told an animated story about his hunting dog. A group of women toasted each other, their bracelets clinking against wine glasses. A teenager groaned at his mother for asking him to put his phone away. Life went on, perfectly ordinary, perfectly blind. She excused herself with a polite smile and rose from her chair. The whispers paused as she passed near the corridor. She didn't look at them, not directly. Instead, she traced the reflections in the polished silver of the dining cart. Both men stiffened, shoulders squared like soldiers awaiting orders. Crew members didn't carry themselves like that. Not real ones. She moved toward the outer deck, needing air, or at least appearing to. The moment the door shut behind her, the noise dulled, replaced by the hush of evening wind and the steady churn of water against the hull. The Mississippi stretched wide and dark now, its surface reflecting the bruised clouds above. The storm had crept closer. Lightning flickered in the distance, faint but insistent, like a warning whispered from the horizon. Passengers crowded. The railing, pointing at the jagged streaks across the sky. Their laughter rang shrill against the approaching thunder. She joined them briefly, offering a soft smile to a child who clutched his father's hand. Then, once eyes turned back to the storm, she slipped further along the deck, out of sight. From there, she could watch. Minutes stretched. A crewman emerged from the stairwell, carrying nothing but returned with a heavy bag. Another leaned casually against the railing, his hand brushing a walkie-talkie hidden beneath his jacket. She breathed slowly, deliberately. Her instincts weren't whispers anymore. They were alarms. And yet, silence wrapped around everything. No one screamed. No one panicked. To the untrained eye, the world aboard was unbroken leisure. But to her, that silence was a predator crouching just beyond reach. She leaned on the railing, eyes narrowing as she tracked another anomaly. Near the stern, 3 men stood together, pretending to admire the view. Their voices carried in fragments, muffled by the wind. Tonight, ready. Signal. The words pricked like needles, sharp even in fragments. She shifted her stance, angling her body so her hat brim hid her gaze. She had been taught never to reveal what she knew, not until it was time. Still, her hand brushed her bag again. Comfort. Preparation. Behind her, a passenger approached, breaking the thread of concentration. Beautiful storm, isn't it? It was the same Ohio woman she'd met earlier, her cheeks flushed from wine. Yes, she answered evenly, though her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. The woman laughed lightly, oblivious. I think it makes the river look alive. My husband hates it, though says it makes him seasick. She allowed a faint chuckle. Understandable. Then the woman wandered off again, leaving her alone with the wind, the water, and the gnawing truth pressing against her ribs. The others saw only a storm. She saw a storm and a plot rising alongside it. She took a slow lap around the deck. At each corner, she paused briefly, committing vantage points to memory. Sightlines, cover, blind spots. Tourists smiled at her, as though she were simply stretching her legs. None of them guessed she was mapping their lifelines. Back inside, the band had switched to a faster tune. Couples danced in the dining hall, feet shuffling awkwardly but joyfully. A crew member wheeled a cart stacked with dishes, but his grip on the handle was too tight, knuckles pale. Another set down glasses with shaking hands. She observed every tremor, every tick. Fear, not fatigue. And fear meant knowledge. She slipped into the lounge, blending into a small group watching a baseball game on the mounted television. Her posture was casual, her eyes fixed on the screen, yet her ears tracked movement behind her. A door opened, then shut quickly. 2 men entered and sat apart from each other, yet too synchronized in their stillness. Her instincts screamed louder now. This was no random cruise. Something was in motion, something planned. And she was sitting in the middle of it, the only one awake to the truth. By the time she returned to her cabin, the hallways had grown quiet. Passengers settled into rooms, doors clicking shut, the hum of conversation fading into muffled background. Noise. She locked her door and leaned against it, exhaling for the first time since dinner. The silence here was different, not threatening, but heavy with decision. Her bag rested on the small table. From it, she drew a plain leather notebook, the kind tourists often carried for travel memories. Only hers wasn't filled with sketches or poems. It was filled with codes, sketches of layouts, and notes written in precise shorthand. She opened to a fresh page and began writing. 221 souls aboard. Minimum 6 suspicious crew. Movement in restricted areas. Storm approaching potential. Cover. She underlined the last note twice. Her pen hovered. She considered writing more her suspicions, her theories, but instead, she shut the notebook firmly. Words wouldn't save anyone. Actions would. And though she hoped she was wrong, though she wished she could just be another traveler on the Tuz River, her instincts told her otherwise. Something was coming. The uneasy silence that wrapped the ship wasn't peace. It was a fuse waiting to burn, and she was the only one watching it spark. The night came quietly at first. The ship's lights flickered on one by one, glowing soft and warm against the encroaching darkness. The storm hovered far downriver, flashes of lightning glimmering faintly on the horizon. Passengers gathered on the main deck for evening festivities. A themed dinner, live music, cocktails. Children wore glow sticks looped around their wrists, waving them like sparklers. She sat near the edge of the crowd, her back straight, her hands folded loosely in her lap. To anyone passing, she looked at ease and other solitary traveler content. To watch life swirl around her, but her eyes kept moving. The suspicious crew members had not disappeared. They moved differently now, clustered more often in pairs. One lingered too long near the emergency alarm panel. Another disappeared into a supply room, emerging with nothing visible in his hands. Though his gait had changed heavier, waited. She noted every detail, her instincts hammering against her ribs. The tension was no longer subtle. It was a drumbeat growing louder, masked only by the laughter of the oblivious. The brass band launched into a lively tune, drawing claps and stomps from the crowd. A waiter refilled wine glasses, his hand trembling just enough that red drops splattered across the white cloth. The Ohio woman from earlier swayed drunkenly with her husband, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. No one noticed the crewman who slid quietly into the shadows near the stairwell. She did. Her gaze sharpened, following his hand as it brushed against. The comms radio clipped to his belt. A faint whisper crackled. And then, everything changed. The first blast came from below, a thunderous roar that shook the entire vessel. The floor lurched beneath her feet. Glasses shattered. Lights swung violently overhead. A wave of screams surged through the dining hall as passengers stumbled, clutching tables for balance. Smoke gushed up from the lower deck, thick and acrid, clawing at throats. The band stopped mid-note, instruments clattering to the floor. "Explosion!" someone shrieked. Chaos ignited instantly. She didn't panic. She couldn't afford to. Her body moved before thought, snatching a child who had slipped from his mother's grasp, pulling him behind cover as a second explosion rattled the hull. Plates rained from shells. The air reeked of burning fuel. Passengers tripped over one another, desperate for exits. But exits became choke points, too many bodies cramming toward too few doors. And then came the gunfire. Sharp metallic cracks split the air. Bullets punched holes into the ceiling, spraying plaster dust. The crowd dropped to the floor in unison, screams muffled by terror. Armed men emerged from the stairwells and service doors, 6 of them, faces hidden beneath black. Masks, weapons raised high. On the ground, one barked, his voice distorted through a thick accent. "Stay down or die." The ship, once alive with laughter, fell into a trembling silence, broken only by sobs and whimpers. She crouched low, shielding the child with her body, eyes locked on the intruders. Her heartbeat slowed, not raced. She counted them, their weapons, their stances. She noted which hand each favored, which one's grip shook, which one's eyes betrayed nerves. Panic blurred the passenger's vision, but her world sharpened into crisp detail. The hijacking had begun. One of the masked men fired another round. Into the ceiling. "Quiet," he roared. "Do not move." A man near the buffet whimpered too loudly. The hijacker turned, weapon raised. In that instant, she shifted, her hand pressed firmly against the child's shoulder. "Stay down," she whispered, her voice calm. Then she slid silently to the side, using overturned chairs for cover. Every movement precise, controlled. The hijacker's attention was on the trembling man, but she was already watching his trigger finger. It twitched with hesitation. Amateur. Dangerous. Yes, but sloppy. Her mind mapped routes. 3 steps forward, pivot left, strike elbow. DICRM. Possible. Risky. Not yet. Patience. Passengers clung to one another. Mothers wrapped themselves around children. Couples whispered prayers. An elderly man fainted, his wife sobbing as she tried to rouse him. Fear saturated the air like thick smoke. But within that fear, she moved like water slipping unnoticed among the desperate, scanning, calculating. She saw the leader then, taller, broader, standing near the center. His weapon steady, his voice sharper. He barked orders to the others, pointing toward the control room. Authority radiated from him. Take him out, she thought, and the rest would falter. But not yet. Not until the moment was right. A hijacker dragged a passenger to his feet, a young man in a baseball cap, shoved him toward the front. Hostage, he shouted. The man stumbled, arms raised, face pale. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Her jaw tightened, but she stayed still. She could strike now, perhaps save one life, but risk many. She measured the variables like weights. On a scale, timing was everything. The leader snarled orders in a language most passengers didn't recognize. One hijacker moved toward the communications panel, smashing it with the butt of his rifle. Sparks flew. No calls for help. Not from here. She clenched her fists, the decision solidifying inside her. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't random. It was organized, planned, and she was the only one capable of unraveling it. Another blast rattled the ship, smaller this time, but enough to keep fear fresh. Passengers cried out, some clutching, bleeding cuts from flying debris. The hijackers shouted over the chaos, corralling people toward the center of the hall. Down, all of you! The Ohio woman sobbed into her husband's chest, whispering prayers. The boy she had saved earlier whimpered softly, clutching her sleeve. She leaned close to him, her voice barely audible. Be brave, stay quiet. His wide eyes locked onto hers. Somehow, her calm steadied him. The leader strode forward, weapon swinging as he scanned the trembling crowd. His gaze passed over her once, not pausing. To him, she was nothing just. Another tourist, powerless, forgettable. That was his mistake. Behind her mask of fear, her mind worked with surgical precision. She cataloged weapons. 3 rifles, 2 handguns, 1 knife. She measured distances. 8 feet to the nearest hijacker, 12 to the leader. She tracked patterns. 2 pacing, 1 guarding the stairwell, the others scattered. Weaknesses. Always. Weaknesses. She would wait. Not long. The time was approaching. As the minutes dragged, the silence thickened. Passengers hardly dared breathe. The ship rocked gently beneath the storm's growing weight, thunder echoing across the water. She stayed crouched, her posture deceptively submissive. But every muscle in her body was coiled, ready. This was no longer leisure, no longer a cruise. It was a battlefield. And while 221 lives trembled in fear, she prepared to reveal herself. She would not remain only another tourist. Not anymore. The dining hall was silent, except for the uneven gasps of frightened passengers. The hijackers moved through the crowd like wolves corralling sheep, weapons sweeping left to right, daring anyone to rise. Every shuffle, every sob, every whispered. Prayer was met with a barked command. She crouched low, one hand resting on the boy's shoulder. He trembled against her side, his glow stick bracelet flickering faintly in the smoke-hazed light. Around them, families clung together, heads pressed down as if the floor itself might shield them. But she didn't bow her head. She studied. She counted. She waited. The leader barked an order in his guttural tongue, and 2 hijackers dragged their hostage, the young man in the baseball cap, toward the stairwell. The boy's mother screamed, breaking the thin silence, and was silenced by the sharp crack of a rifle shot into the ceiling. Plaster rained down like dust. Her pulse slowed. Her world narrowed to 3 things. The gunman nearest her, the boy. At her side, and the knife strapped against her own ankle, her one weapon, concealed, forgotten even by security during boarding. The hijacker nearest her paced too close, his weapon swinging carelessly as he scanned the passengers. His boots scuffed the floorboards, stopping less than a yard from where she crouched. And that was the mistake. The moment fractured like glass. She surged upward with the speed of a striking hawk. One hand gripped the rifle barrel, jerking it skyward. The other drove the heel of her palm into his nose. Cartilage crunched. Blood sprayed, gasps erupted. Passengers froze. She twisted, pulling the weapon free, and in a single fluid motion, she flipped it backward, cracked the stock into his temple, and dropped him unconscious to the floor. For a second, silence. The hijackers stared in shock, their authority shaken, and then their leader roared, "Pieter!" Bullets ripped through the air, sparks flying as they struck steel beams and shattered glass. Passengers screamed, diving flat. But she moved with trained precision. The rifle barked in her hands, a controlled burst that took out the light fixture overhead, plunging the hall into flickering shadows. She ducked behind a toppled table, reloading with the speed of someone who had done this too many times before. Her cover wasn't luck, it was instinct. Every angle, every escape route, every potential shield was already mapped in her mind. And in that chaos, her mask slipped. She wasn't a tourist. She wasn't a bystander. She was something far more dangerous. Passengers peeked through their arms, stunned. The quiet woman who had sat alone at dinner now moved like a predator. Eyes hard, every strike deliberate. The Ohio couple gaped. The boy clung tighter, whispering, "She's not like us." No, she wasn't. The hijackers closed in, but she was faster. She darted from cover to cover, her movements crisp, honed. With a swift kick, she sent one gunman's legs out from beneath him, his rifle skittering across the floor. She seized the weapon, slung it over her shoulder, and kept moving. Two passengers tried to crawl toward safety. She shielded them with her own body, firing in sharp bursts to force the hijackers back. "Stay low, move now," she commanded, her voice steady and commanding. The authority in her tone wasn't new. It was the voice of someone used to being obeyed. And slowly, passengers began to obey her. The leader's fury grew. He shoved the baseball cap hostage forward, pressing a pistol to his head. "Stop or he dies," the crowd whimpered. A woman sobbed. But she didn't freeze. She straightened from her crouch, rifle lowered, eyes locked on the leaders. Her voice carried through the hall, clear as steel. "You don't want to do this." The words weren't panicked. They weren't pleading. They were calculated, designed to destabilize. The leader sneered, pressing the barrel harder to the young man's temple. One more step and he never finished. With blinding speed, she fired not at him, but at the light above. The bulb exploded in sparks, showering both hostage and captor. The leader flinched instinctively, his aim wavering. That was all she needed. She lunged, sliding across the floor, rifle barrel striking his wrist. The pistol flew. Her knee slammed into his chest, sending him sprawling. The hostage scrambled free, crawling back toward the safety of the crowd. Passengers gasped, disbelief written across every face. The tourist had just disarmed the terrorist leader. The fight wasn't over. The remaining hijackers roared, charging. But she was already moving, already countering. Her training unfolded like choreography blocks, strikes, precise shots fired only when necessary. She didn't waste bullets. She didn't waste breath. And as the minutes stretched, something remarkable happened. The passengers began to shift. Fear slowly transformed into hope. They clung to her presence, her authority. They whispered to each other, "She knows what she's doing." She can protect us. Follow her. A spark of courage flickered among the trembling. She ducked behind a beam, pressing her back against it, reloading again. The boy crept closer, his tiny hand touching her arm. "Who are you?" he whispered. For the briefest second, her eyes softened. Then her jaw tightened again. "No one," she murmured. "Just someone who won't let them hurt you." But the truth was already bleeding through. Her movements, her aim, her confidence, it was undeniable. She wasn't just a woman on vacation. She was trained. She was lethal. She was prepared. And now, 221 lives hung on her shoulders. The leader staggered to his feet, blood streaming from his temple. His rage burned hotter than his pain. "You think you are a hero?" He spat. "You die first." He lunged, knife flashing in his hand. But she didn't flinch. She sidestepped, grabbed his wrist mid-swing, twisted hard until the blade clattered to the ground, and drove her elbow into his ribs. He collapsed again, wheezing, clutching his side. She kicked the knife across the floor, far from his reach. And for the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. Passengers erupted in whispers. Some began crawling closer to her, seeking protection. Others pressed their children into her care, as if she alone could shield them from death. And in truth, she could. Her cover was gone. Her quiet anonymity shattered. Her identity wasn't public yet, but her skills had spoken louder than words. And though the passengers didn't know her name, they knew this. She was their only chance. She raised, the rifle high, her stance steady, her eyes cold. "Everyone stay down. I'll get you out of this." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a promise. The leader, groaning on the floor, glared up at her with venom. "Who are you?" he hissed. Her gaze didn't waver. And though she didn't answer, aloud, the passengers already knew she was no tourist. She was a protector, a soldier, a hidden guardian. And tonight, she would save them. The dining hall smelled of smoke and fear. Shattered glass crunched beneath boots, and the lights flickered weakly, leaving patches of shadow where danger could lurk unseen. The hijackers had been thrown off balance by her sudden resistance. But they were not finished. Their weapons still glinted, their anger sharper now than ever. She stood tall in the chaos, rifle firm in her grip, eyes scanning every corner. Around her, passengers clung to each other, trembling but beginning to look at her differently. They no longer saw just a woman with a camera. They saw someone who could command a battlefield. The leader groaned on the floor where she'd left. Him, clutching his ribs, but his men were regrouping fast. 3 of them fanned out, shouting orders, trying to tighten their hold. Her mind ticked like a clock. She had to move now. "Everyone stay low," she barked, her voice slicing through the noise. "Do not run. Do not scream. Stay together." Her tone was sharp, commanding. Passengers obeyed, almost instinctively, shuffling into tighter groups near cover. Parents shielded children with their bodies. Couples pressed flat against the floor, all eyes flicking to her for direction. The Ohio couple held each other, whispering prayers, but when she caught their gaze, they nodded. They trusted her. It was a fragile thread, but it was enough. The hijackers advanced cautiously, rifles raised. One shouted in broken English, "Give up. You cannot win." Her lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. "That's what you think." She crouched, gesturing quickly to the nearest group of passengers. "You two pull those tables together now. Build a barrier, quietly." They scrambled to obey, dragging furniture across the floor, the noise masked by the groaning engines and distant thunder outside. She shifted again, whispering to the boy she'd saved earlier. "Stay behind me. Don't move unless I tell you." He nodded, clutching her sleeve, his small body trembling but eyes shining with trust. Gunfire erupted suddenly, splinters spraying from a nearby pillar. Passengers screamed, ducking lower. She reacted instantly, rolling behind the newly built barricade, returning fire in controlled bursts. Not wild panic, not reckless. Each shot was measured, forcing the hijackers to duck rather than advance. The sound of her precision steadied the passengers. They realized she wasn't just fighting, she was protecting them. "Stay down," she called again. "You'll be safe if you follow my lead." Hope flickered in frightened eyes. The hijackers weren't used to resistance. Their plan had been simple: explosions, intimidation, control. But now their authority was cracked. One shouted angrily. Rushing forward to regain dominance, she let him come. At the last second, she stepped out, grabbed his rifle barrel, and twisted. His momentum became his downfall. She flipped him to the floor, disarmed him, and knocked him unconscious with a sharp strike. Gasps rippled through the passengers. A woman whispered, She's saving us." The tide was turning. She moved quickly, dragging the fallen man's weapon back to the barricade. She checked its magazine, slid it into her growing cache, and handed the empty rifle to a nearby man. "Hold it like this," she instructed, showing him how to point, without exposing himself. "If they rush us, aim at their legs. You don't have to hit, just slow them down." His hands shook, but he nodded. For the first time, he felt like he could do something other than cower. One by one, she began distributing responsibility, assigning roles, giving people purpose. A mother and teenage daughter were told to keep watch on the stairwell. A pair of college students were instructed to collect bottles of water and tend to the injured. In minutes, chaos became organization. The leader staggered upright again, wiping blood from his face, rage blazing in his eyes. "You!" he snarled, pointing at her. "Who are you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reloaded calmly. Her silence more unnerving than any boast. He growled, shouting to his men, "Take hostages. Use them as shields." Two hijackers grabbed passengers, yanking them up roughly. Screams pierced the hall as guns pressed against trembling heads. The passengers froze. Their newfound courage wavered. Her eyes hardened. This was the turning point. She raised her voice, clear and commanding. "Everyone else stay down. Do not move." Then she stepped out from cover, rifle steady, eyes locked on the hijacker holding a hostage. Her voice was low, calm, lethal. "Let them go." The hijacker sneered, pressing the barrel harder against his hostage. "Or what?" Her finger tightened on the trigger. Her aim didn't waver. "Or you don't walk out of here alive." The room froze, breaths held, fear and hope tangled. The hijacker's eyes flickered, uncertainty breaking through his mask of bravado. He wasn't used to someone calling his bluff. In that hesitation, she fired precise, controlled. The bullet struck his shoulder, spinning him backward, forcing him to release the hostage. The passenger scrambled free, sobbing. The hijacker crumpled, weapon clattering uselessly to the floor. The second hijacker shoved his hostage forward, panicking. She was already moving. A sharp kick sent his rifle flying, and a swift strike to his jaw dropped him cold. Two more threats neutralized. The passengers gasped again, but now awe was mixing with their fear. She's one of them," a man whispered. "No," his wife corrected, tears streaming down her cheeks. "She's here for us." The battle raged on. The hijackers regrouped, furious, desperate. But she matched every move with cunning. She knew when to fire, when to retreat, when to let them think they had control before ripping it away again. She improvised weapons, broken bottles, chair, legs, even fire extinguishers. She taught passengers to use them, turning victims into allies. The ship itself became her chessboard, every corridor and shadow another move in her strategy. It wasn't just strength that kept them alive. It was her mind. As the minutes stretched into an hour, the passengers began whispering to each other in reverent tones. They no longer asked, "Who is she?" They asked, "What is she?" The boy at her side tugged her sleeve again. "You're not just a tourist, are you?" This time she met his gaze. She didn't smile. She didn't explain. She simply said, "I'm someone who knows how to fight." And then she turned back to the battlefield, leading them deeper into survival. By the time the gunfire quieted, the hall was transformed. Tables stacked into barricades, injured cared for, passengers armed with improvised tools. They were still terrified, but they were no longer helpless. Because of her, she had become their leader, their protector. And though her name remained hidden, her true identity was now undeniable. She wasn't one of them. She was far more. And tonight, she would prove it until the last hijacker fell. The night outside had grown savage. Rain hammered the river in sheets, lightning forked across the sky, and thunder rolled so deep it shook the ship's bones. Inside, the dining hall looked like the wreckage of a battlefield. Tables overturned, glass scattered, smoke drifting lazily through broken lights. And in the center of it all stood the woman. Her rifle was steady, her breathing controlled. Around her, the passengers huddled, exhausted but alive, clinging to the fragile hope she had built. They no longer asked who she was. They no longer questioned her orders. They simply followed, because following her meant living. The hijackers were fewer now, their numbers cut by her calculated strikes. But they were not finished. And there, leader bloodied, furious still roared commands, desperate to regain control. "Kill her," he shouted, spittle flying from his lips. Now, two of his men advanced, reckless, their desperation sharper than their aim. Bullets chewed through wood, ricocheting off steel beams. Passengers screamed, ducking low. She moved with the fluid precision of someone who had faced death before. She dropped one attacker with a clean shot, then spun, slammed the butt of her rifle into the other's jaw, and kicked his legs from under him. He collapsed hard, weapon clattering away. The leader's face twisted in rage. For the first time, fear flickered beneath his fury. But as she fought, a thought pressed harder into her mind. Time was running out. The ship's engines groaned. The explosions earlier had damaged its systems, and the storm outside was worsening. They couldn't hold out forever. They needed rescue. And rescue wouldn't come unless she made sure someone knew they were still alive. She ducked behind a barricade, pulling a small device from her pocket, a compact transmitter, no larger. Then a lighter. To the passengers, it looked like nothing. To her, it was everything. She flipped it on, adjusted the frequency with nimble fingers, and tapped a coded signal, a pattern only certain ears would recognize. Short, sharp bursts of sound, lost to the chaos of storm and static except to those listening for it. A beacon, a call to arms. Her identity was no longer just a secret. It was a signal sent into the night, revealing exactly who she was to those who mattered. The boy beside her tugged her sleeve again, his voice tiny but steady. "You're not just saving us, are you? You've done this before." Her jaw tightened. She didn't answer directly. "Stay close. It's almost over." But his words echoed in her chest. He was right. She wasn't just saving them. She was doing what she had always done, fighting battles in shadows, protecting lives without recognition. And tonight, her cover was gone. The battle pressed on. The leader grew more desperate, dragging another hostage forward, this time the Ohio woman. Her husband lunged in protest, but was shoved back with a rifle butt. The leader pressed a pistol to her temple. His eyes blazed with hatred. Enough. You drop weapon, or she dies. Passengers froze. The room fell silent, every breath trapped in terror. The woman straightened slowly, rifle raised but not aimed. Her voice rang clear over the thunder. You're finished. Put the gun down. The leader snarled. No, I kill her, then you, then everyone. She took a step closer, her eyes locked on his, unwavering. If you pull that trigger, you won't live long enough to see the body fall. The man's hand shook, rage battling. Fear. Lightning split the sky outside, casting the hall in blinding white for an instant. And in that instant, she moved. A single shot rang out. The pistol flew from his hand, skittering across the floor. The Ohio woman collapsed into her husband's arms, sobbing in relief. The passengers erupted in cries, half terror, half awe. The leader roared, but his authority was shattered. He stumbled backward, clutching his bleeding hand. She advanced. On him like a storm given form. Who are you? He spat, retreating. She didn't answer. Not yet. Because just then, the sound came. A thump in the distance. A mechanical roar cutting through thunder. The passengers lifted their heads, hope blooming in their eyes. Helicopters, someone whispered. She allowed herself the smallest nod. Her signal had been received. Rescue was coming. The leader heard it too. His face contorted, fury twisting into desperation. He screamed to his remaining men, "Fight! Fight until death!" Gunfire erupted again, frantic, uncontrolled. Passengers ducked, shrieking. But she was already moving, already countering, already shielding. She darted from cover to cover, her shots precise, her strikes brutal. Every move bought the passengers more time, every second another heartbeat closer to salvation. Through shuttered windows, the faint glow of searchlights cut across the storm, sweeping over the deck. The roar of helicopter blades grew louder. Nearer, the passengers began to cry, not from fear, but from hope. The hijackers faltered. Their leader screamed in rage, but their morale crumbled. One by one, they fell disarmed, incapacitated, or fleeing into the bowels of the ship. And then the ship shook again, not from an explosion, but from the thud of boots. Armed responders stormed aboard, weapons raised, voices sharp and commanding. U.S. Coast Guard, stay down. Passengers obeyed instantly, flattening themselves to the floor. Relief poured from them in sobs and prayers. The hijackers tried to resist, but against trained forces, their desperation collapsed into surrender. Weapons clattered to the ground. Shouts of defiance became cries of defeat. It was over. In the middle of the chaos, she lowered her rifle. Slowly, her breathing was steady, her posture unbroken. But her eyes betrayed exhaustion, the weight of everything she had carried for hours. A rescuer approached, saluting sharply, recognition flickering in his gaze. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "we received your signal. Command sends their regards." The passengers stared, confused. They heard his words, but didn't understand. "Ma'am? Command? Signal?" The pieces clicked, but the truth still felt. Unreal. The Ohio woman, trembling but alive, whispered, She's not one of us." Her husband shook his head, eyes wide. "No, she's the reason we're alive." The boy tugged her sleeve once more, his voice small but reverent. "I knew you weren't just a tourist." This time, she looked at him directly. Her voice was gentle but firm. "No, I'm not." For the first time, the truth slipped free. "I'm here because protecting people like you is what I've always done." The rescuers moved through the ship, securing the last hijackers, tending to the wounded, guiding passengers toward safety. But the passengers couldn't take their eyes off her. She stood apart from them, not with arrogance, but with a weight they couldn't share. She had saved them, yes, but she had also revealed herself. Not fully, not with names and ranks, but enough. They no longer saw a woman with a camera. They saw what she truly was. A guardian hidden in plain sight, a soldier in the skin of a tourist. And though rescue had come, they knew deep down they owed their lives to her alone. The storm had finally broken. The first pale streaks of dawn spread across the river, washing the wreckage of the ship in soft light. Helicopters hovered above, their searchlights dimmed now, replaced by the rising sun. Rescue boats clustered. Around the vessel, ropes and ladders draped over its sides as passengers were evacuated one group at a time. The once proud cruise ship looked battered and bruised, smoke still curling lazily from the decks where the explosions had torn it open. Yet it floated. It endured, just like the 221 lives it had carried through the night. And at the center of it all, she stood quietly apart. The passengers filed past her, some limping, some bandaged, all exhausted. They whispered her name, though they didn't know it. Some bowed their heads in gratitude. Others reached for her hand, squeezing it with tears in their eyes. Parents lifted their children toward her, as if she were a talisman against nightmares. She accepted their thanks with a nod, nothing more. She didn't bask in their reverence. She didn't explain herself. She just stood there, watchful even now, as if the danger hadn't fully passed. The boy she'd protected all night lingered near her, his glow stick bracelet still faintly flickering. His mother guided him toward the evacuation rope, but he pulled back long enough to look up at her one last time. "Will I see you again?" he asked, voice full of both hope and dread. Her heart tightened. She crouched so her eyes were level with his. "You won't need to," she said softly, "because you'll be safe." He frowned as if he didn't understand, but he nodded anyway. Children always sense truth, even when words were scarce. She touched his shoulder lightly, then watched as he and his mother descended toward the waiting boats. On the deck, the Coast Guard commander approached her. His uniform was soaked, his face weary from the storm and the firefight. He looked at her not with curiosity, but with recognition. "Your signal saved them," he said quietly, glancing at the passengers. "All 221. Command wants to debrief you." She shook her head. "Not here. Not now." He studied her for a moment, then gave a short nod. Understood. They didn't exchange names. They didn't need to. In their world, identity was a currency never spent lightly. As the last groups of passengers were guided off the ship, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. Media helicopters circled at a distance, their long lenses capturing every moment. The world was already watching. By evening, the story would spread across every channel, every headline. Cruise ship hijacking foiled minus 221 lives saved by mysterious woman. But no article would have her name. No photograph would be official. To the world, she would remain a shadow, a mystery wrapped in fragments of witness accounts. Some would call her a soldier, others an angel. Some would dismiss the stories as exaggeration, the product of trauma. But the passengers knew. They had seen her fight. They had felt her protect them. They had lived because of her. On the dock, as families reunited with relief and tears, she stood at the edge of the crowd, already slipping into anonymity. Her jeans were torn, her shirt stained with soot, her hair damp from rain. She looked almost ordinary again, as if she could vanish into any city street. But the passengers' eyes followed her. The Ohio woman, arm around her husband, whispered to those beside her. She wasn't just a tourist. She was something else. Someone sent to watch over us. The college students nodded vigorously, one muttering, "She moved like a soldier." no better than a soldier. An older man pressed his hands together as if in prayer. "Guardian angel," he murmured. That's what she was. And slowly, the passengers began to share the same thought, unspoken but understood. They would never forget her. The commander returned, clipboard in hand. "We'll need your statement." She met his gaze, then shook her head again. "You have mine already," she said. "The signal. The rest is in your report." He hesitated. "They'll want to know who you are." Her eyes swept the crowd, 221 souls, alive, safe, holding each other tightly. Then she turned back to him. "They don't need to know. They just need to live." He exhaled, resigned. "Then this never happened." She gave a faint smile. "Exactly." As dawn brightened, buses arrived to take the rescued passengers to safety. Reporters clamored, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. Questions rained down. What happened? Who saved you? What's her name? The passengers shielded her, forming an unspoken wall of silence. Some genuinely didn't know. Others knew enough to keep quiet. A few simply didn't want to share her, as if revealing her would lessen what she had done for them. And so the reporters left with fragments. She was quiet. She moved like she knew everything. She saved us all. No name, no origin. Just a shadow of a hero. Later, when the buses departed and the docks grew quiet again, she remained, alone. The commander approached once more, offering transport. She declined. "I have my own way," she said simply. And with that, she walked away from the wreckage, from the flashing cameras, from the crying passengers who owed her their lives. She disappeared into the rising sun, as if she had never been there at all. In the days that followed, the story spread across the nation. News anchors debated her identity. Experts speculated. Who was she? Military? Intelligence? Off-duty law enforcement? The FBI refused to comment. The Coast Guard gave only vague statements. And so the mystery grew. But in quiet homes across the country, 221 people told their story to loved ones. They told of the woman who stood between them and death, of how she turned fear into courage, chaos into order, despair into hope. They spoke of her not as a stranger, but as a guardian. And though her name was never spoken, her legacy lived in every heartbeat she had saved. For her part, she returned to the life she always lived, unseen, uncelebrated, moving silently from one mission to the next. But sometimes, late at night, she remembered the boy with the glow-stick bracelet, the woman who whispered prayers, the man who fainted and woke to see her standing watch. She remembered the faces she had saved, and that was enough. She didn't need headlines. She didn't need recognition. She only needed to know that when the moment came, she had done what she was meant to do. Protect, save, disappear. The world would never know her name, but 221 lives did. And that was her true identity, not tourist, not soldier, not even hero. Protector, always a protector.